The Day of Demolition, Part 1. The Uninvited Guest. Stop everything and subscribe now to our channel so you don't miss these unforgettable dramas. The dinner disruption, prepare for shock. A table perfectly set in a sumptuous mansion on the Gold Coast of Greenwich, Connecticut. The tinkling of fine silver, the hushed murmur of polite, hollow conversation. This was the life of Amelia Mia Vance, 38, a gilded cage built over 15 years of appearances that she had learned to call home. But tonight, an uninvited guest didn't just knock. She kicked the door down. Her husband's mistress, Chloe Rivers, brazen and cruel, decided this formal family dinner was the perfect stage to humiliate Mia and claim her prize. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the diplomatic move from the matriarch, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, to smooth over the disaster. But what Mrs. Vance did next wasn't smoothing. It was total demolition. No one, least of all her own son, Alexander, saw the icy fury she was about to unleash in the name of true loyalty. The stage of controlled opulence, the dining room of the Winter Sun estate, was a masterpiece of controlled opulence in old-school New England style. A heavy crystal chandelier, an authentic relic from a Venetian palace, dripped golden light over a solid mahogany table, polished to a mirror sheen. Every place setting was a fortress of silverware, with Sèvres porcelain plates bearing the Montenegro family crest, a stoic lion holding a single perfect rose. For 15 years, Mia had been the mistress of this domain, the curator of its perfection. She ensured every fork was aligned, every centerpiece lily was fresh, and every guest felt the weight of immutable family tradition. Today was the first Sunday of the month, a non-negotiable family dinner. Mia smoothed the lap of her navy blue silk dress, a nervous tic she could never break. Across from her, her father-in-law, Mr. Frederick, a man whose presence had diminished in direct proportion to his wife's growing dominance, quietly swirled his red wine. Beside him sat Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the matriarch, dressed in a severe yet exquisitely tailored charcoal gray suit, her silver hair pulled into an impeccable chignon. Mrs. Vance inspected the room not as a hostess, but as a queen surveying her court. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, missed nothing. Alexander's sister, Lauren, and her husband, Patrick, occupied the remaining seats. They were kind, predictable people who provided a necessary buffer of pleasant conversation. Mia smiled and nodded, offering appropriate replies, but her mind was elsewhere. On the empty chair beside her, Alexander's chair. He was late. Again. The distance between them had started subtly. One late night at the office turned into two. Then, weeks of unexpected business trips. When he was home, he was a ghost, his attention glued to the blue light of his phone. His answers were monosyllabic and vague. She knew. For 15 years, she had managed his home, raised their 2 children, now in college, and presided over charity galas, all to create a perfect, frictionless world for Alexander to return to. She had been the silent partner, the unelected official in charge of the family's social and domestic grace. But lately, she felt less like a partner and more like an elegant piece of furniture. The silence before the storm. Mia caught Mrs. Vance's gaze across the table. Her mother-in-law's expression was illegible, a carefully blank mask. Mrs. Vance had never been a warm woman, but she was stringent about propriety and order. Alexander's tardiness, Mia knew, would be noted as a disruption of that order. "I'm sure the traffic from Manhattan must be dreadful," offered Lauren, her voice a little too bright, sensing the tension. "Alexander should have left earlier," Mrs. Vance declared simply. It wasn't a critique so much as a statement of fact. "Dinner is at 7. It has been for 30 years. Mia forced a weak smile. He had a last-minute meeting he couldn't escape, Something about the Hong Kong merger. It was a lie, or at least a guess. She hated this new role as his apologist. She was defending a man who was no longer there, covering for a husband who had become a stranger. She looked around the table at the shimmering silver and the portraits of Montenegro ancestors glaring from the walls, and she felt a deep, terrifying sense of isolation. This whole room, this entire life, was built around her marriage to Alexander. If that foundation collapsed, what would be left of her? Just then, the distant sound of the heavy front door opening echoed down the hall, followed by a murmur of voices. Not just Alexander's voice, but a woman's voice, punctuated by a light, crystal laugh that sounded utterly foreign to the venerable, quiet halls of the Vance home. Mia's heart began to pound against her ribs. Every muscle in her body went rigid. Only Mrs. Vance remained perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the dining room archway. She didn't look surprised. She looked like a predator who had just heard a twig snap in the woods, alert and waiting. The unveiling Alexander Vance, 45, strode into the dining room with the casual arrogance of a man who believed the world arranged itself for his convenience. He was handsome, undeniably, but his smile tonight was stretched a little too wide, a little too bright. "Apologies for the delay, everyone," his voice boomed with false cordiality. "I was detained. You know how it is. I've brought a guest. Hope no one minds." Standing in the doorway, framed like a portrait, was the owner of the crystal laugh. She was young, perhaps late 20s, with a cascade of fiery red hair falling over the shoulders of a tight, emerald green dress. The dress was expensive, but utterly inappropriate for a quiet family dinner. She radiated a kind of voracious, ruthless energy that felt like a struck match in the stale, old-money atmosphere of the room. Mia felt the air leave her lungs. This was no colleague. This was the pungent, foreign scent on his suits. This was the reason for the late nights and the silent phone screen. "This is Chloe Rivers," Alexander said, placing a possessive hand on her lower back. "Chloe is one of our rising stars at the firm, an absolute genius with hostile acquisitions. I've been mentoring her." Chloe's eyes, a striking shade of jade green, swept the table. She gave a small, rehearsed smile that held no warmth. Her gaze landed on Mia. It was a brazen scrutiny, like a buyer inspecting a property she intended to acquire. There was a flicker of triumph in those green depths. "It's an honor to finally meet all of you," Chloe said, her voice soft and syrupy. "Alexander talks about his family constantly." The lie was so audacious it was almost impressive. Mrs. Vance gestured coolly to the empty space next to Alexander. "Well, Miss Rivers, since you are here, you might as well sit down." "Anna," she called. The housekeeper appeared, her face a stoic mask, and moments later disappeared to set another place. Mia watched the exchange, her mind a maelstrom of shock and humiliation. Alexander had not only brought his mistress into their family home, but he had brought her to this dinner, Mrs. Vance's dinner. It was a declaration of war. Alexander has made his move, bringing his mistress Chloe to the most sacred family gathering. How should Mia respond to Chloe's aggressive presence? With cold indifference, or with a subtle, sharp retort? Comment your strategy for Mia below, and subscribe so you don't miss the epic takedown in Part 2, The Day of Demolition. Part 2. The matriarch's verdict. This is the breaking point. Chloe has settled in, and the tension is suffocating. Hit that like button and subscribe. We want to know, what is the most brutal thing Chloe will say to break Mia? Comment your guess below. The strategic insults. Alexander sat down, guiding Chloe to the chair beside him, his hand lingering on her shoulder. He launched into a story about a deal they had just closed. Chloe interjected at strategic moments, laughed at his jokes, and touched his arm with a familiarity that was both casual and deeply intimate. They moved and spoke with a shared rhythm that excluded everyone else at the table, most notably Mia. Mia felt 1,000 eyes on her, even though she knew there were only 5. She forced herself to look up and meet Chloe's gaze again. The younger woman watched her over the rim of her wine glass, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. A direct challenge. "So, Mia," Chloe began, her voice dripping with false sweetness, deliberately interrupting Alexander's conversation with his father. "Alexander tells me you do charity work. That must be very gratifying. Keeps you busy." The condescension was thick. Before Mia could formulate a reply, Alexander intervened. "Mia is chairing the Children's Hospital Foundation Gala this year. It's a huge undertaking." Chloe's smile widened. "Oh, right. Party planning. That's wonderful. I could never do it. I'm just not detail-oriented in that way. My focus is always on the big picture, the strategy, the win." She took a deliberate sip of her wine, her green eyes fixed on Mia's. The insult was perfectly aimed. Mia, the party planner. The past. Chloe, the strategist. The future. Mia felt a surge of cold fury cut through her shock. She lifted her chin. Her voice was firm and clear when she finally spoke. "You're right, Miss Rivers. We do. One of my strengths is knowing the difference between a business meeting and a family dinner. Some people, it seems, are still learning to make that distinction." A stunned silence fell over the table. Chloe's smile didn't drop, but a hard glint appeared in her eyes. The mask had slipped for a second. "Oh, I think Alexander and I know exactly what this is," Chloe purred, placing her hand directly on top of Alexander's on the table. "It's about being with the people who matter." Despite everything, Mrs. Eleanor Vance remained silent, eating her quail with slow, deliberate movements. But Mia, who had studied her mother-in-law for a decade and a half, saw it, a tightening of the muscles around her jaw, a stillness in her posture that wasn't relaxed, but coiled. Mrs. Vance was listening. She was watching, and she was judging. The brutal demolition, Chloe, sensing she had the matriarch's attention, decided to abandon subtlety. "Speaking of investments," Chloe said, cutting Patrick off mid-sentence, "Alexander has been making very bold moves lately. He's divesting from some of the older sentimental assets and reinvesting in things with more aggressive growth potential. It's a brilliant strategy. Out with the old, in with the new. Right, darling?" Mia understood the subtext perfectly. Older, sentimental assets. The words were aimed directly at her heart. She was the family heirloom porcelain, beautiful, valuable in a classic sense, but ultimately fragile and outdated, ready to be shelved to make room for something sleek and modern. Chloe decided to go for the kill. She leaned forward, her emerald dress gaping slightly, a calculated display. It's easy to lose your edge when your life is too perfect, too predictable. A man like Alexander needs a challenge. He needs to feel alive. "Isn't that right, Alexander?" Alexander squirmed, finally cornered. The bravado he had entered with was fraying. "Chloe, perhaps we should discuss this later." "Why?" she challenged, her voice growing louder, more theatrical. "Everyone here is family, or almost family. I think it's important to be honest. All cards on the table. For example, I think you should know that the Hong Kong merger Alexander was working on last week, that was in a presidential suite at the St. Regis, and the work was very, very hands-on. The crude imagery was designed for maximum humiliation." Mia felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Alexander, silently begging him to stop this, to deny it. He would not meet her gaze. His silence was his answer. It was the confirmation of every fear she had harbored for months. "And that new cologne you said you didn't recognize, Mia? I bought it for him. I thought it smelled like success, like a man who isn't afraid to take what he wants. And what Alexander wants is me." Chloe leaned back, a triumphant queen who had just checkmated her opponent. Mia felt a bottomless betrayal, not just from Alexander, but from the 15 years she had devoted to this family. She stood up from her chair, her legs unsteady. "Isabella, sit down!" Alexander hissed, finally finding his voice, an order, not a plea. She turned her head to him, and in that moment, the shock and pain crystallized into a diamond-hard rage. "Don't you dare!" she whispered, trembling with fury. She looked at Chloe's smug, victorious face. "You think you've won? You are nothing but a cliché. A sad, pathetic girl, so desperate for a life you can't build yourself that you have to steal it from someone else. But you haven't stolen my life. You've only done me the favor of taking out the trash." The Queen intervenes. "Enough!" The word sliced through the air like a whip. It was not Mia's voice, nor Alexander's. It was Mrs. Eleanor Vance. Mrs. Vance neatly placed her knife and fork on her plate, parallel to each other. She dabbed her lips with her linen napkin, folded it, and placed it on the table. She hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. The single word carried more weight and authority than all the shouting that had preceded it. She inspected the scene with her cold, evaluating eyes. Her gaze swept past a stunned Chloe, a furious Mia, and finally landed on her son, Alexander. The look she gave him was not one of maternal disappointment or anger. It was something far colder, far more terrifying. It was a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. The room was completely silent. The battle had been declared. The lines had been drawn. But everyone had misjudged who the true power player at the table was. They had all been waiting for the Queen's move, and she was finally ready to play her hand. Hit that like button if the matriarch has won you over. Comment with the emoji if you think Mrs. Vance is about to destroy her own son. What is the deepest secret Mrs. Vance holds that will dismantle Alexander's life? Share your theories below. The Day of Demolition. Part 3. The Financial Expropriation. The Queen has spoken. The room is silent, waiting for Mrs. Vance to deliver her devastating verdict. Hit that like button and subscribe. This is the moment Alexander learns the price of his arrogance. Comment below with your reaction to the matriarch's authority. The matriarch's lecture. The silence following Mrs. Vance's sharp command was absolute. Lauren looked ready to disappear into the floor, while Patrick seemed to be actively trying to merge with his chair. Mr. Frederick, for the first time all night, looked directly at his wife, his expression a mix of apprehension and morbid curiosity. Mia stood anchored to her spot, watching her mother-in-law with a strange mix of dread and a desperate flicker of hope. Alexander was the first to break the spell, trying to regain control like he would in a hostile boardroom. "Mother, this is a private matter between Mia and me." Mrs. Vance didn't even look at him. Her steely gaze was fixed entirely on Chloe. "Miss Rivers," her voice began, low and even, utterly devoid of emotion. "You were a guest in my home, a guest brought here under false pretenses by my son, who seems to have forgotten basic decency. You have abused my hospitality, insulted my daughter-in-law, and displayed a vulgarity I haven't witnessed since a longshoreman's strike in 1978. Chloe, clearly mistaking Mrs. Vance's calm for elderly weakness, regained her bravado. "With all due respect, Mrs. Vance," she said, raising her chin defiantly. "I am being honest. Your son is in love with me. He wants a divorce. I simply decided to accelerate the process." "You decided," Mrs. Vance repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "You, a person I have known for precisely 47 minutes, decided to accelerate the dissolution of my son's 15-year marriage in my dining room. Do you believe you have that kind of authority?" "I have Alexander's heart. I think that is authority enough," Chloe retorted, a smug smile returning. "Alexander," Mrs. Vance said, finally turning her head to face her son. Her voice was soft, almost sweet, which was somehow more threatening than if she had screamed. "Is this true? Do you love this woman? Do you intend to leave your wife for her?" Alexander swallowed hard. He chose the path of the coward, the path of equivocation. Mother, it's complicated. Mia and I have been distant for years. Chloe, she understands me. She understands your wallet. Mia spat out, the words escaping before she could stop them. No, Mrs. Vance cut her off. She will not stay out of this. This is her home. This is her family. You, Alexander, are the intruder here. You and this creature you brought with you. Chloe's jaw dropped. The insult hit its mark. Then you are a bigger fool than I ever thought possible, Mrs. Vance said, her voice ringing with clarity. She looked disappointed, as if examining a product that had revealed a fatal, unredeemable flaw. Then she did the unexpected. She turned to Mia, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. Mia, she said, her voice firm. Miss Rivers has made it quite clear that she feels you are an older, sentimental asset. She believes she is replacing you. She is wrong. Mrs. Vance paused, letting her words sink in. A slow, chilling smile touched her lips. It is time, she said, her voice resonating with newfound power, for a lesson in family finances. The demolition. Ace up the sleeve. For 35 years, Mrs. Vance began, adopting the calm, measured tone of a professor starting a lecture. My husband Frederick and I have managed the Montenegro family assets. She fixed her son with her gaze. The company you run, Alexander. Montenegro Strategies. You believe you built it. You tell your friends at the golf club you started it from scratch, with your own grit and brilliance. This is the narrative you have built for yourself, and it is a fiction. Alexander's face began to flush. Mother, what are you talking about? I secured the venture capital. I put in the work. You secured nothing. Mrs. Vance cut in, her voice sharp as glass. The initial seed capital, the $5 million, did not come from a venture capital firm. It came from a trust that I control, a trust established by my father, not yours. The subsequent rounds of financing, the credit lines, the collateral that kept you afloat during the dot-com bubble and the 2008 recession. It was all underwritten by me, using assets from that same trust. You were never a brilliant entrepreneur, Alexander. You were a subsidized hobby. Color drained from Alexander's face. He looked utterly shocked. In fact, my domain extends to the terms of your employment. You are the CEO of Montenegro Strategies, yes, but you are not the owner. You are an employee, a very generously salaried employee, with stock options that are, I should add, entirely conditional. The majority shareholder, the controlling interest, is the Montenegro Family Trust, and I am the sole trustee. Chloe was now staring at Mrs. Vance with wide, horrified eyes. The predatory shine was gone, replaced by the sickening realization that she had targeted the wrong prey. She had hitched her wagon to a prince, only to discover he was merely the court jester. The verdict. Now, let's talk about Mia, Mrs. Vance said, turning slightly to face her daughter-in-law. When you married Mia, Alexander, you were a 30-year-old with a mediocre job and a mountain of potential you seemed determined to squander. Mia came from a good, wealthy family. Do you remember the prenup we all signed? Alexander nodded blankly. The agreement stipulated that, in the event of divorce due to your infidelity, a clause her father, a very wise man, insisted upon, all assets acquired during the marriage would be split, 70-30 in her favor. Mrs. Vance's cold gaze returned to Chloe. You see, Miss Rivers, you made a critical error in your strategic analysis. You identified Mia as a liability to be discarded. But the truth is, Mia is a significant shareholder. You, on the other hand, are what we call in business a bad debt, an expense with no return on investment. She clasped her hands over the table. The lecture was over. It was time for the verdict. So this is what will happen, she declared with absolute finality. Alexander, you will pack one suitcase with your sneakers and anything else you personally own. You will leave this house tonight. You are terminated as CEO of Montenegro Strategies, effective immediately. Your shares are voided, according to the moral clause in your employment contract. The company credit cards will be canceled by the time you reach the end of the driveway. Mother, you can't! Alexander gasped, his arrogant facade finally cracking into panic. Yes, I can, Mrs. Vance said simply. And I have. Now, as for you, Miss Rivers. She looked at Chloe as if she were a piece of lint. Your services to the company are also no longer necessary. I believe your collaboration with Alexander constitutes a breach of your contract as well. You have 10 minutes to leave my property before I have you removed for trespassing. Finally, she looked at Mia, whose tears had stopped, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. Mia, dear, I apologize for my son's deplorable behavior. This house is your home for as long as you wish it to be. Tomorrow, we will have lunch with my lawyers and begin the process of ensuring you receive every last thing you are entitled to, which I assure you is substantial. What a plot twist. Alexander was never the boss. Comment below with the emoji if Mistress Vance has earned the title of the ultimate power player. Who will pay the higher price for this betrayal? The weak husband, Alexander, or the calculating mistress, Chloe? Don't forget to subscribe. The final confrontation and the cleanup are next. The Day of Demolition, Part 4. The aftermath and ascent, the fate is sealed. The matriarch's decree has left Alexander and Chloe in ruins. Hit that like button and subscribe. This is the satisfying conclusion where Mia finds her freedom. Tell me, what do you think Mrs. Vance's true motivation was? Loyalty to Mia or preservation of her own legacy? Comment your thoughts below. Chaos and clarity. The impact of Mrs. Vance's decree was instant and chaotic. Alexander jumped out of his seat, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. Mother, you can't just fire me. It's my company, my life. It was never your company, Alexander, Mrs. Vance replied, her voice immutable. It was a loan, and your credit has expired. Chloe, watching her entire future evaporate, turned on Alexander with the ferocity of a cornered animal. You told me you owned everything. You lied, she shrieked. Her carefully constructed glamour melted away to reveal raw, greedy panic. You said we'd travel, that I'd never have to work again, you pathetic liar. Shut up, Chloe, Alexander yelled back. This is your fault. You forced this tonight. You've ruined everything. Their bitter, terrified recriminations filled the elegant dining room, a vulgar stain on its pristine atmosphere. Mia watched them, and a strange clarity washed over her. The pain of the betrayal was still there, but seeing Alexander not as the charismatic, powerful man she had married, but as a spoiled, whimpering child being scolded by his mother, broke the spell he had held over her for 15 years. The man she loved, or the idea of the man she loved, was gone. In his place was this weak, staggering stranger. Mrs. Vance let them fight for another minute before speaking again, her voice cutting through their frantic noise. Security will be here in 5 minutes to escort you both out. I suggest you use the time to collect your personal belongings. The threat was real. Alexander knew it. His shoulders slumped in defeat. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a vacant, hollow look. He had been completely, utterly checkmated. Without another word, he turned and left the dining room, his heavy footsteps ascending the grand staircase. Chloe was left alone, looking utterly lost. Her emerald dress now seemed cheap, her bold makeup garish. She looked at Mrs. Vance, then at Mia, with a desperate, pleading look. There was no pity to be found. With a choked sob, she snatched her designer bag from the floor and fled the room. The new alliance, the dining room fell silent once more. The storm had passed, leaving devastation in its wake. Anna, the housekeeper, appeared, summoned by the silence, and began clearing the plates with quiet efficiency. Finally, Mia and Mrs. Vance were alone at the long mahogany table. Mia found her voice, though it was rough and weak. I had no idea, Eleanor, about the trust, the finances. Mrs. Vance looked at her, and for the first time in 15 years, Mia saw something beyond cold evaluation in her mother-in-law's eyes. It was a flash of empathy, perhaps even respect. Of course you didn't, Mrs. Vance said. Alexander didn't either. It was an arrangement I made with your father before the wedding. We both saw Alexander's potential for recklessness. Your father wanted to ensure your future was protected, and I wanted to ensure my family's legacy was not squandered by a fool. She reached across the table, and in a gesture that shocked Mia more than anything else that had happened all night, she placed her cool, dry hand over Mia's. I am not a sentimental woman, Mia. You know that. But I value loyalty. I value integrity. For 15 years, you have been a loyal and kind wife and mother. You maintained this family's dignity, even when my son was doing his best to drag it through the mud. You are a Montenegro in character, if not by birth. That girl, she said with a gesture of disgust toward the empty doorway, was an opportunistic parasite. And Alexander is a disappointment, my greatest disappointment. A tear slipped down Mia's cheek, not of sadness, but of strange, overwhelming relief. She wasn't being discarded. She wasn't being replaced. She had been seen. Her years of silent dedication, which she thought had gone unnoticed, had been observed and valued by the one person whose opinion truly mattered. He is gone. They are gone. Now, we rebuild. The grand finale, the new matriarch, in the quiet, cavernous dining room, surrounded by the ghosts of a broken marriage, Mia felt not an end, but a terrifying new beginning. And for the first time, she wasn't facing it alone. She was facing it with the most powerful ally she could have ever imagined. 2 months later, the divorce was finalized. The settlement was, as stipulated, extremely generous to Mia. Then, Mrs. Vance summoned Mia to the study. I am officially requesting the board modify the structure of the family trust. I am stepping down as the sole trustee, she announced. I am naming 2 new co-trustees. She slid a document across the desk. Below the line already signed by Mrs. Vance, Mia's name was clearly typed. I am not asking you to be my replacement, Mrs. Vance said, her posture as straight and unyielding as ever. I am asking you to be my partner. I have watched you for 2 months, Mia. You have a cautious and discerning mind, where Alexander had a reckless and arrogant one. You have empathy, which makes you a better judge of a person's value than a resume ever could. And you are loyal. In this world, that is the most valuable and rare asset of all. Mia looked at the document, then back at Mrs. Vance's expectant expression. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by a powerful sense of purpose. Agreed, Mia said, her voice quiet but firm. She walked back to the desk, took the heavy pen, and signed her name on the line. Her signature was no longer the elegant cursive of the society wife she had been. It was stronger, bolder, the signature of a woman reclaiming her power. And so, the estate, once a symbol of a broken marriage, became the headquarters of an empire run by 2 formidable women. Mia, no longer a wife in the shadows, and Mrs. Vance, the matriarch who rewrote the rules, proved that true family is not about bloodlines, but about unshakable loyalty and the strength found in the most unexpected of alliances. Final reflection. What a powerful story of justice and empowerment. The women of the Vance Montenegro family didn't just survive betrayal, they built a new legacy from its ashes. What do you predict will be Mia's greatest challenge as the new co-trustee? Thank you for subscribing, liking, and sharing this journey. The story. And what if the perfect life was a perfect lie? And what if the perfect life was a perfect lie? For 7 months, Valeria Valdez believed she had it all. A loving husband, a multi-billion-dollar empire within reach, and her first child on the way. She envisioned a future full of laughter in their spacious penthouse in the Salamanca district of Madrid. But her husband, the charismatic Maximus Torres, was painting a different picture, one created during clandestine business trips. When a single damning clue sends a 7 months pregnant Valeria on a desperate journey to an isolated resort on the coast of Marbella, the masterpiece of deceit Maximus has been weaving is about to be torn to shreds. This is not just a story of infidelity. It is a saga of high-stakes betrayal, corporate espionage, and a woman who discovers that the greatest power lies not in wealth, but in ruin. Stay with us. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories. The first tier in the tapestry. The afternoon sun streamed through the penthouse windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the Italian marble floors. From this vantage point, 60 stories above the Retiro Park, Madrid seemed like a blueprint, a perfect grid of ambition and light. Valeria Valdez Torres rested a hand on the soft, prominent swell of her abdomen, feeling the light, fluttering kicks of the life within her. 7 months pregnant, she felt both deeply powerful and exquisitely vulnerable. The baby's room was complete, a serene masterpiece in cream and soft gray, with a handmade celestial mobile waiting to spin over a crib that cost more than most people's cars. Everything in her life was engineered for perfection, a testament to the combined power of the Valdez and Torres dynasties. Her family, the Valdez, were old money, their wealth rooted in shipping and real estate, a quiet, unwavering force in the city's financial landscape. Maximus's fortune was newer, louder, forged in the volatile crucible of hedge funds. He was the brilliant, audacious wunderkind, the man who could sniff out a market change like a shark smells blood. Their marriage had been the social event of the year, a merger of legacy and audacity. Valeria traced the rim of a crystal glass, the condensation cool against her fingers. She watched her husband, who had his back to her. Phone pressed to his ear, Maximus Torres was a man sculpted by success, his custom suit perfectly draped over his athletic frame. And his voice, even muffled, was a deep, confident baritone that could calm panicked investors and charm seasoned CEOs. He was her rock, the charismatic architect of their shared future, or so she believed. "No, absolutely not," he said into the phone, his tone cutting. "The deadline is immutable. We move on the 25th, not a day later. Handle it." He ended the call with a decisive tap and turned with a practiced smile, instantly softening the harsh lines of his face. "Sorry, my love. Incompetence is the only market I can't short sell." He crossed the vast living room, his expensive leather shoes silent on the plush Aubusson rug. He knelt before her, placing a hand over hers on her belly. "And how are my two favorite people in the world? Are we well?" Valeria smiled, the familiar warmth of his touch chasing away a flicker of unease. "He's been very active today. I think he's going to be a footballer, or a CEO who kicks his competitors into submission." Maximus grinned, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He leaned in and kissed her, a deep, reassuring kiss that tasted faintly of expensive whiskey, and something else she couldn't quite place. A scent. It wasn't his usual cologne, Creed Aventus, nor her perfume. It was floral and slightly spicy. A woman's scent. She dismissed it. He had been in meetings all day, surrounded by people. It meant nothing. "Listen," he began, settling back on his heels, his expression turning serious. "Something has come up. Something big. You know the tech merger I've been working on?" "The Barcelona one," Valeria nodded. It was all he had talked about for weeks, a complex acquisition that would, in his words, reshape the digital landscape. "Well, The key players have flown in for an unscheduled summit. It's last minute, I know, and I hate it. But I have to fly out tonight. It's only for a couple of days, 3 at most. It's the final push, Val. This deal will secure our son's future 10 times over. A knot of disappointment tightened in her chest. Tonight? But Maximus, my checkup is tomorrow. The important one. We were supposed to hear the heartbeat together again. His face fell with practiced, perfect sympathy. I know, my love. I am so sorry. Believe me, I'd rather be here, holding your hand, than in a sterile boardroom. But this is critical. Timing is everything. He stroked her cheek. I'll be back before you know it. And I promise I won't miss another appointment. I'll make it up to you. A week in Ibiza after the baby is born. Just the 3 of us. The promise of a luxurious future was a common balm he applied to present. Disappointments. It usually worked, but this time the unease lingered. It was the suddenness of it all. Maximus was a meticulous planner. Last-minute chaos wasn't his style. Of course, she said, forcing a smile. I understand. It's for us. Exactly, he said, relief flooding his features. He stood and kissed her forehead. I'm going to pack. My flight leaves in 3 hours. As he strode toward their master suite, Valeria's gaze fell on his briefcase, which he had left by the sofa. A corner of a receipt peeked out from the side pocket. Normally, she never would have looked. It would have felt like a violation, a crack in the foundation of their trust. But the faint, strange perfume scent, the suddenness of the trip, the slickness of his explanation, it all coalesced into a single, sharp point of curiosity. With her heart beating with a strange mix of guilt and apprehension, she reached out and slowly, carefully pulled out the receipt. It wasn't from a restaurant or a client lunch. It was from La Perla, the lingerie boutique. The date was that very afternoon. She scanned the items: a silk chemise, a lacy balconette bra, a matching thong. Size small. Valeria was a size medium, and with her pregnancy had been living in soft, comfortable cottons. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to explain. A gift for a friend's wife, a gift for her, for after the baby. But why hide it? Why wouldn't he have presented it with a flourish as he usually did? She quickly folded the receipt and slipped it back, her hands shaking. She drew a long, trembling breath, trying to calm her frantic pulse. She was being paranoid. Pregnancy stress was making her imagine things. Maximus loved her. He was building a life for them. He was a good man. He emerged from the bedroom 20 minutes later, pulling an elegant Rimowa suitcase. He was already in his travel attire, a comfortable yet stylish cashmere sweater and dark trousers. He looked like a global executive on the move. All set, his voice announced, nonchalant. The car is waiting downstairs. Now, I want you to promise me you'll rest. Don't overdo it. Beatrice is coming over tomorrow to go to the doctor with you, right? Valeria nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Her sister Beatrice had always been more cynical about Maximus, seeing his ambition as a razor's edge that could easily cut both ways. Valeria had always defended him, painting Beatrice's concerns as sisterly overprotectiveness. Now Beatrice's skeptical words echoed in her mind. Good, Maximus said. He embraced her, his arms strong and secure. It felt like a lie. The whole embrace felt like a hollow performance. I'll call you as soon as I land. I love you more than anything. I love you too. She'd managed to whisper the words, feeling like ash in her mouth. She watched from the window as he got into the black car, a tiny, insignificant figure, 60 stories below. The car did not turn east, toward Barajas or Cuatro Vientos Airport. It headed west, onto the A5, toward Marbella. The cold dread solidified into terrifying certainty. The Barcelona Tech Summit was a lie. The lingerie wasn't for her, And her husband wasn't on a business trip. She was on her way to an assignation, alone in the cavernous silence of their penthouse, surrounded by the trappings of her perfect life. Valeria Valdez Torres finally allowed the facade to crack. A single hot tear traced a path down her cheek, a silent harbinger of the storm about to break. She wasn't just a wife. She was a Valdez, and Valdez didn't crumble. They fought. The question was, how? The initial shock was already hardening into something else, something cold and sharp. A plan began to form in the ruins of her trust, a plan that would take her out of her gilded cage and set her on a collision course with the ugly truth. The interception, the silence in the penthouse, after Maximus left, was no longer peaceful. It was suffocating. Every ticking clock, every hum of the climate control system seemed to mock Valeria's newfound solitude. She walked the grand rooms, touching the cold surfaces of their shared life. The polished mahogany of the dining table where they had hosted dazzling dinners, the soft leather of the armchair where he read Expansión every morning. It all felt like a movie set, the backdrop to a story she had mistakenly believed was hers. She sank down onto the edge of their vast bed, the La Perla receipt burning in her mind. It was a single piece of evidence, perhaps circumstantial. She needed more. Doubt was a poison, but certainty was a weapon. Her mind raced, reviewing the last few weeks, searching for other inconsistencies she had overlooked. The late-night conference calls, where his voice was hushed. The weekends he had spent at the office, yet came home looking relaxed, not tired. His personal laptop password, which had always been her birthday, had suddenly changed. At the time, she had put it down to his firm's new cybersecurity protocols. Now it felt like a closed door she had never dared to question. The next morning, Beatrice arrived, her sharp eyes immediately registering the tension in Valeria's posture. Beatrice Valdez was the opposite of her sister in many ways. Where Valeria was diplomatic and serene, Beatrice was direct and fiery, her loyalty fierce, and her bullshit detector impeccable. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Beatrice said, skipping a greeting as she put her bag down on a chair. Did the prince of the stock market forget to kiss his pregnant princess before he left? Valeria's composure, so carefully maintained, crumbled overnight. She handed the receipt to her sister. Beatrice's eyes narrowed as she read it. Her lips tightened into a thin line. "Size small," Beatrice said flatly. "Well, that's not for you, is it? Unless he's planning 2 years out. The man is many things, but a long-range lingerie planner isn't one of them." She looked at Valeria, her expression softening from sarcasm to deep concern. "Oh, Val, what did he say?" Through tears she could no longer suppress, Valeria recounted the story. The sudden trip, the Barcelona excuse, the car heading west. "Marbella," Beatrice breathed, her mind already working. Of course it's off-season. Quiet, exclusive. The perfect place to hide a dirty little secret in plain sight. Maximus has a corporate account at El Faro. It's one of those ridiculously private resorts where the staff are trained to be blind, deaf, and mute. The kind of place you went for your first anniversary. The first anniversary. It was a secluded spot nestled in a private cove, a haven of discreet luxury. The memory was now contaminated, corrupted. "I have to know, B," Valeria said, her voice acquiring an edge of steel that surprised even herself. "I can't sit here in this museum of our marriage and wait for him to come home smelling of lies and another woman's perfume. I have to see it for myself." Beatrice studied her sister. The tear-stained face was still there, but underneath it, a new resolution was hardening. This was the Valdez blood, kicking in. The same indomitable will that had allowed their great-grandfather to build a shipping empire from nothing. "Are you sure, Val?" Beatrice asked softly. You're 7 months pregnant. The stress, the shock. What's more stressful? Valeria countered, standing up, her hands protectively cradling her belly. The agonizing uncertainty or the cold, hard truth? This isn't just about my feelings anymore. It's about my child. I will not bring my son or daughter into a life built on a foundation of deception. I need to know what I'm fighting. Beatrice nodded slowly, a grim smile touching her lips. All right, then we go to war. But we do it smart. No dramatic phone calls, no hysteria. We gather irrefutable evidence. We need more than a receipt for whore underwear. The first step was logistics. A trip to the doctor's office was repurposed. While Beatrice waited in the car, Valeria had her appointment. The strong, steady rhythm of her baby's heartbeat was a comfort, a small pulse of courage. She asked her obstetrician, Dr. Wells, if light travel was allowed. Everything looks perfect, Valeria, Dr. Wells said warmly. A short drive, say a couple of hours, is perfectly fine. Just stay hydrated and don't exert yourself too much. It was the authorization she needed. The next step was intelligence. While Valeria was at the doctor's, Beatrice was on the phone calling in a favor from a friend who worked in high-end concierge services. It was a long shot, but the world of the ultra-wealthy was surprisingly small. When Valeria returned to the car, Beatrice was furiously tapping on her phone. Okay, I think I have something, she said, her voice low and excited. My friend Jessica owes me one. She pulled some strings. She can't access the official guest list at El Faro, but she has a source in their spa. Jessica's source confirms a reservation was made for this afternoon. A 90-minute couples deep tissue massage, booked under Mr. Torres's name. The reservation notes specify 2 therapists, male and female, for Mr. and Mrs. Torres. The words Mrs. Torres felt like a physical blow. Not only was he with another woman, he was giving her Valeria's title, her identity in this secret, sordid world he had created. The appointment is at 4 o'clock, Beatrice continued, her voice hardening. That's in 3 hours. We can make it if we leave now. The plan was audacious, bordering on reckless. But it was the only path forward that felt real. Valeria called the family chauffeur, a stoic man named Franklin, who had been with the Valdez for 30 years and knew how to be discreet. She simply told him they needed to go to Marbella. He asked no questions. The drive out of the city was a blur. The familiar skyline receded, replaced by manicured suburbs, and then the long, flat stretch of the southern highway. Valeria sat in the luxurious leather seat of the Mercedes, a bottle of water in her hand, her mind a vortex of past memories and future fears. She remembered Maximus proposing on a wind-swept cliff on the coast of Cadiz, telling her his life had been in black and white until she gave it color. Had that been a lie too? Was he a sociopath? A brilliant actor playing the role of a loving husband? Beatrice, ever the pragmatist, was strategizing. Okay, when we get there, we can't just storm in. We have to be smart. You are Valeria Valdez Torres. You have every right to be there. We'll go to reception. You'll say you're surprising your husband. You will be charming, serene. They know the Valdez name. They won't question you. Ask for a key to his suite. Villa Oceanfront 7. That's where he is. Beatrice had managed to squeeze the villa number from her source. Villa 7, the most private, most expensive accommodation at the resort, with its own private plunge pool and a terrace overlooking the desolate beauty of the winter ocean. What if he's not there? What if they're at the spa? Valeria asked. Her voice trembled slightly. Then we wait, Beatrice said firmly. We sit in the lobby, order tea, and wait for Mr. and Mrs. Torres to return from their relaxing afternoon. But my gut tells me they'll go back to the room, People like that want to enjoy every overpriced inch of the fantasy they've paid for. As they passed the iconic sign welcoming them to Marbella, Valeria felt a shift within her. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but it was being overlaid by a chilling sense of purpose. She was no longer just the wounded pregnant wife. She was the CEO of this operation, the chief arbiter of her own destiny. She smoothed her dress, took a deep breath, and practiced the serene, confident smile she would need. She was about to step onto the stage of the biggest performance of her life, and she would not miss her cue. The frayed thread had led her this far, to the edge of the Atlantic, and she was ready to pull on it until the whole tapestry of lies unraveled. Do you think Valeria was right to go confront Maximus? Or should she have waited? Leave your opinion in the comments. The showdown at Villa 7. The El Faro Resort and Spa was designed to look carved from the very dunes it occupied. Aged gray cedar, vast expanses of glass, and minimalist landscaping created an atmosphere of monastic tranquility and savagely expensive taste. Even in the stark light of a winter afternoon, it was beautiful. The beauty felt like an insult. Franklin pulled the Mercedes S-Class smoothly under the porte cochere. A sharp, crisp young valet in his uniform rushed to open the door. Beatrice gave Valeria one last firm squeeze of the hand. It's showtime. Remember who you are. You own this place and everyone in it. Valeria stepped out of the car, pulling her cashmere shawl around her shoulders. She was the very image of polished elegance, her pregnancy only adding to her aura of serene, maternal grace. No one would guess the tempest that raged inside her. The lobby was a cathedral of quiet luxury. A massive stone fireplace crackled at one end, and the air smelled of sea salt and burning birchwood. A single receptionist, a woman with an impossibly perfect posture, stood behind a monolithic counter of reclaimed wood. Valeria glided to the counter, Beatrice a half step behind her, a silent guard. "Good afternoon," Valeria said, her voice smooth as cream. "I'm here to surprise my husband, Maximus Torres. I believe he's in one of your oceanfront villas." The receptionist, whose name tag read Chloe, offered a polite, professional smile. "Of course, Mrs. Torres. It is a pleasure to have you with us. May I see some identification?" Valeria produced her driver's license. Chloe's eyes flickered from the ID to Valeria's face, then to the name. Torres. The recognition was instant. Maximus Torres was a man who commanded respect and discretion. "Everything appears to be in order," Chloe said. Her smile warmed slightly. "Mr. Torres is checked into Villa 7. I must say, what a wonderful surprise. He mentioned he was here for intense, solitary work." The lie repeated by a stranger felt like a fresh stab. Solitary work? Valeria's smile did not waver. "He works too hard. I decided he needed a distraction. Could I trouble you for a key to the villa? I would like to wait for him to return." This was the critical moment. A request for a second key without the main guest's presence was a breach of protocol, even for a spouse. Chloe hesitated. Her professional training conflicted with the desire to please a guest of Valeria's stature. "Normally, we would need to call the room for verbal confirmation from Mr. Torres," she began, her tone apologetic. Valeria leaned slightly forward, her voice dropping to a confidential, charming whisper. "Chloe, I just drove 2.5 hours from the city. I'm 7 months pregnant, and I am desperate to see the look on his face when he walks in and finds me there. A phone call would spoil everything. Surely we can keep this our little secret?" She placed a hand on her belly, a gesture that was both genuine and masterfully deployed. The combination of her name, her visible pregnancy, and her conspiratorial charm was too powerful to resist. Chloe's professional resolve melted. "Of course, Mrs. Torres," she said, her smile now genuine. "For you, we can make an exception. Let me program you a key." As the receptionist worked, Beatrice let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Valeria was magnificent. She was playing the part of the adoring wife so perfectly, it was chilling. With the key card in hand, they walked away from the counter. "Villa 7 is at the very edge of the property," Beatrice murmured. "It offers the most privacy." "The most privacy to do what?" Valeria said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. The walk to the villa was the longest of Valeria's life. They followed a winding stone path that snaked through the wind-swept seagrass. The air grew colder, sharper, and the sound of crashing waves became a relentless roar. Every step was a drumbeat toward a detonation. Her earlier calm was evaporating, replaced by a raw, visceral dread. Her palms were sweating, her heart hammered against her ribs. And then they arrived. Villa 7. The name was etched on a simple, elegant plaque beside a heavy wooden door. It looked anonymous, innocuous, but behind it lay the truth. "Val, are you ready?" Beatrice asked. Her voice soft. Valeria looked at the door, then out at the gray, churning ocean. She thought of her unborn child, floating peacefully in his own silent world, oblivious to the tsunami about to hit hers. That image gave her the last surge of strength she needed. "Yes," she said. She turned to her sister. "Wait here. I need to do this alone." Beatrice hesitated, her protective instincts flaring. But she saw the look in Valeria's eyes. It was not a request, but a command. She nodded and stepped back. Valeria took a deep breath. She held the keycard to the electronic lock and waited for the tiny green light. It flashed. With a soft click, the lock disengaged. She pushed the door open. The villa entrance led into a spacious living room, immaculately decorated in tones of sand and stone. A bottle of Bollinger champagne rested in a silver ice bucket on a low table, 2 glasses beside it. One was empty, the other half full with a slight smear of lipstick on the rim. A man's jacket, Maximus's, was carelessly thrown over a chair. And just beyond, from the bedroom, a door stood partially ajar. She could hear voices, a man's low chuckle, Maximus's laugh, and a woman's higher, lighter laughter in response. The sound paralyzed her for a second. It was real. This was happening. Moving as if in a dream, she glided across the silent room. Her hand was steady as she pushed the bedroom door fully open. The scene before her was one of lazy, post-coital intimacy. The king-size bed was a tangle of white sheets. Maximus was propped up on the pillows, wearing nothing but boxer briefs, a tablet resting on his lap. And sitting beside him, her back to the door, was a woman. She was wearing a short black silk robe, the one from the La Perla bag. Valeria realized with a pang of nausea. Her dark hair was tousled, and she was tracing a pattern on Maximus's chest with her finger. "Are you sure no one will find out?" the woman's voice said. It was a voice Valeria vaguely recognized. "Your wife isn't the suspicious type, Valeria," Maximus scoffed, his tone dripping with a casual cruelty that shattered Valeria's heart into a million pieces. "She trusts me completely. She thinks I'm in Barcelona saving the world. She's a good woman, but a bit naive. It's one of her charms." He was about to say more, but he looked up, perhaps sensing a shift in the light, or a sudden chill in the air. His eyes met Valeria's. Time seemed to stop. Color drained from Maximus's face, replaced by a ghastly mottled white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The tablet slid from his lap, hitting the floor with a soft thud. He looked like a man who had just watched his own executioner walk through the door. The woman, sensing his sudden terror, turned around. Her face was a mask of confusion, which then transformed into startled recognition. Valeria's blood ran cold. She knew this woman. It was Celine Delgado, a fiercely ambitious rising star at a rival investment firm, Sterling Nash. She was known for her beauty, her brilliance, and her utter ruthlessness. This was no casual, meaningless fling. It was the entanglement with a direct professional competitor. Celine Delgado looked at Valeria, her mouth slightly agape. For a moment, all three were frozen in a tableau of shock, betrayal, and discovery. It was Valeria who broke the silence. Her voice was not the shriek of a hysterical wife. It was low, quiet, and utterly devastating. It was the voice of ice and steel. "Don't get up on my account," she said, her eyes locked on her husband's. "It looks like you're in the middle of some very intense solitary work." She used his own lie as the first twist of the knife. Maximus flinched as if she had physically struck him. The game was over. The perfect life was a pile of rubble, and Valeria was the undisputed, terrifying victor of this brutal first battle. The price of arrogance, the silence that followed Valeria's words, was thick and suffocating. Celine Delgado, regaining her composure with the speed of a seasoned predator, quickly clutched the silk robe tighter, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. But Maximus remained frozen, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated panic. The smug master of the universe was gone, replaced by a cornered animal. Maximus finally stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Val? What? What are you doing here? You should be in Madrid. The baby." "The baby is fine," Valeria cut him off, her tone glacial. "He has a strong heart, unlike his father." She let her gaze glide disdainfully over Celine, then back to Maximus. "I see the Barcelona Tech Summit relocated, and the dress code is more casual than I imagined. Is she part of the acquisition, Maximus? Just a disposable asset?" Each word was a precisely aimed dart. Celine's face hardened. She stood up, a calculated move to assert some form of control. "I think I should go." "No," Valeria said, her voice dropping lower, yet carrying an authority that rooted Celine to the spot. "Stay. You were part of this business meeting. You should see it to its conclusion." Valeria took a deliberate step into the room, her presence dominating the space. She glanced around the suite. The champagne, the tangled sheets, the view of the desolate ocean. "It's a beautiful room. I remember it. We celebrated our first anniversary here. Did you tell her that? Or does the personal history of the places you defile not matter?" Maximus finally found his legs, scrambling out of bed and reaching for his trousers. "Val, please, let's not do this here. Let's go somewhere and talk. This is not what it looks like." Valeria let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of humor. "It's not what it looks like, Maximus? Do you think I'm an idiot? Do you have any idea how insulting that phrase is? I'm in a hotel room you booked in your name, looking at you and your associate from a rival firm, half naked in a bed you paid for. It is exactly what it looks like. The only question is, for how long?" Celine, seeing an opening to sow chaos, spoke up. "About 6 months, she said coldly, looking directly at Valeria. "If you're going to have the details, you might as well have all of them." It was a cruel, calculated blow, designed to shatter Valeria's composure. But Valeria didn't even flinch. She did not grant Celine a single glance. Her attention remained completely on her husband, the true architect of this betrayal. 6 months, Valeria repeated softly, nodding to herself. "So this started right after we found out I was pregnant. That's a special kind of cruelty, Maximus. You deserve an award for it." She turned, her movement fluid and elegant, and walked back toward the door. She did not slam it. She did not run. She simply left, leaving a void of shock and recrimination in her wake. Her retreat was more powerful than any shouting match. Beatrice waited by the door, her face pale with anxiety. The moment she saw Valeria's expression, a mask of terrifying, cold calm, she knew. "Let's go," Valeria said, her voice toneless. They walked back down the winding stone path, the roar of the ocean now sounding like a symphony of her rage. She remained silent until they were safely inside the climate-controlled silence of the Mercedes, driving away from the resort. Only then did her body begin to shake, a violent, uncontrollable tremor. The adrenaline vanished, and the crushing weight of the betrayal hit her. She didn't scream. The sobbing was a quiet, convulsive thing that racked her entire body. Beatrice held her, offering what little comfort she could. "He is dead to us," Beatrice whispered fiercely. "He is nothing. We'll call Dad. We'll get the lawyers. We'll burn him to the ground." Valeria's shaking slowly subsided, replaced by an icy resolve. "Not yet." Her voice was rough. "I need to understand it all first. This wasn't just a cheap fling, bae. The woman was Celine Delgado." Beatrice's eyes widened. "From Sterling Nash? Are you serious? Maximus is in the middle of that hostile takeover bid against them. What in God's name is he thinking, sleeping with the enemy?" "I don't know," Valeria said, "but I'm going to find out." The confession and the war room. They returned to the city in near silence. Arriving at the empty penthouse felt strange, contaminated. She instructed Franklin to drive her to her father's residence in the Salamanca district. She couldn't bear to be in the house she had shared with Maximus. Just as she was walking into the grand, old-world foyer of her father's building, her phone vibrated. It was Maximus. She ignored it. He called again, and again. On the 10th call, a text message appeared. "Val, I know you hate me. I deserve it. But you have to listen. It's not what you think. Celine is not my mistress. It's business. I'm using her. Call me. It's vital." Valeria stared at the message, her heart pounding. "I'm using her." It was a desperate, self-serving excuse. A classic narcissist's tactic. Reframe the betrayal as a brilliant, if ruthless, strategic move. He was trying to appeal to her pragmatism, the part of her that understood the cutthroat world they lived in. She almost deleted it. But the mention of Celine's name, the sheer audacity of the claim, planted a seed of doubt. And in some twisted way, was he speaking a sliver of the truth? The affair with a direct business rival was too specific, too reckless to be random. Her phone vibrated again. Another text from Maximus. "She's been feeding me insider info on Sterling Nash, their defense strategy, their key shareholder weaknesses. This whole thing was a honey trap. But I was the one running it. It was for the deal. For us. Please, Val, I can explain." This was the twist. The sudden, sickening lurch. He was admitting to a different kind of crime. Not just adultery, but an act of deeply unethical, potentially illegal, corporate espionage. He wasn't apologizing for the affair. He was trying to reframe it as a sacrifice for their financial gain. He was trying to make her an accomplice. The revelation hit her with the force of a physical blow, leaving her breathless. Her husband wasn't just a cheat. He was either a fool playing a dangerous game or a monster trying to justify his actions with greed. The line between personal betrayal and professional conspiracy had just blurred irrevocably. She stood in the marble foyer of her father's building, the phone heavy in her hand. The situation had just become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. This was no longer just a divorce. It was a war on two fronts, and Maximus, in his desperation, had just handed her a powerful new weapon. The knowledge of his methods. He thought he was explaining his way out of trouble. He had no idea he was giving her the ammunition she would need to secure his complete and utter destruction. The true trap. Alistair Valdez's apartment was the antithesis of the sleek, modern penthouse Valeria shared with Maximus. It was a fortress of old money, full of dark wood, ancestral portraits, and the comforting scent of aged leather and paper. It was a space that radiated permanence and power. Alistair himself was cut from the same cloth. At 65, he was tall and silver-haired, with piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. He was a man who had weathered market crashes, hostile takeovers, and personal tragedies with the same stoic, unshakable resolve. When Valeria, flanked by a scowling Beatrice, told him the story, he listened without interruption, his face an illegible mask. He didn't rage. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply absorbed the information, his mind processing it like a complex balance sheet. When she finished showing him Maximus's text messages, he remained silent for a full minute, his linked fingers resting on his lips. "The man is a fool," he finally said, his voice a low, dangerous murmur. "To attempt to justify infidelity as a business strategy, it's a frankly stunning level of moral bankruptcy." "He thinks it will work," Valeria said, her voice hollow. "He thinks I'm so invested in our wealth that I'll forgive the method." "He's appealing to what he knows best," Alistair corrected softly. "Greed. He judges you by his own depraved standards. He has profoundly underestimated you. That will be his undoing." He stood and walked to the vast window overlooking the city. "This is no longer a simple matter for a divorce lawyer, Valeria. He has confessed corporate espionage in writing. He has implicated himself in a plot that could not only destroy him, but also create significant blowback for our family, if not handled correctly." "What do we do?" Beatrice asked, leaning forward. "We have him. Just release this to his firm's board. Extradite him." "No," Alistair said, turning from the window. "A public explosion is messy. It creates unpredictable shrapnel. We will not move until we control the entire board. We need to be surgical. First, we operate under the assumption that Maximus is lying. That this "I was using her" narrative is a fabrication to save his hide. But we also operate under the assumption that he might be telling the truth, which is in many ways worse. A man who would use an affair as a business tool is capable of any betrayal. For the next 4 to 48 hours, the Valdez residence became a war room. Alistair enlisted his chief legal counsel and a private investigator, a former CNI agent named Julian, who specialized in high-stakes, discreet corporate intelligence. Valeria was not a passive participant. The shock had morphed into a cold, diamond-hard fury. She was an active strategist. Her mind, honed by a lifetime of observing her father, proved to be sharp and ruthless. She provided Julian with every detail she could recall about Maximus's recent behavior, names he had mentioned, trips he had taken, the secretive new patterns to his work. She gave him the login details to their shared family cloud storage accounts. Anything that might hold a clue. "Maximus believes his greatest weapon is his intelligence," Valeria told the team, her voice steady. "His true weakness is his ego. He believes he is infallible, that he is the smartest man in any room. That is the vulnerability we will exploit." While Julian began his deep digital dive, Valeria made a call. She dialed William Sanz, Maximus's partner and COO at Torres Capital. William was the cautious, steady hand to Maximus's bold, often reckless genius. He was a man of numbers and risk analysis, who, on more than one occasion, had privately voiced concerns to Valeria about Maximus's aggressive strategies. "William, it's Valeria Torres," she said, her voice calm and professional when he answered. "I need to speak with you urgently, in person and off the record. It concerns a major undisclosed liability for the firm." The gravity in her tone was unmistakable. They agreed to meet the next morning at a quiet cafe, away from the financial district. Meanwhile, Julian struck gold. Buried deep in a nested folder in a shared family cloud account, a folder labeled Vacation Plans that Valeria had forgotten existed, he found Maximus's digital trove. It was a series of encrypted files, but Maximus, in his hubris, had used a password related to a personal milestone. Julian's team easily cross-referenced the ticker symbol of the first company he had bankrupted. Inside were Maximus's notes on the Sterling Nash acquisition, and they confirmed his text messages. He was using Celine. The files contained detailed summaries of their meetings, listing information she had allegedly provided about Sterling Nash's defense strategies, their board divisions, the pressure points of their largest institutional shareholders. Maximus had meticulously documented his own conspiracy. He saw it as a record of his brilliance. Valeria saw it as a signed confession. But as Julian dug deeper, another layer emerged. He cross-referenced the information Celine had allegedly provided with real-time market data and Sterling Nash's public filings. And he found a discrepancy, a terrifying one. He called Alistair and Valeria into the study. "There's a problem," he said, his precise Andalusian accent cutting through the tension. "The woman's, Celine's, information is not entirely accurate. Some of it is good, enough to build trust. But the most critical data points, those concerning shareholder positions and their debt covenants, are subtly wrong. They aren't mistakes. They are traps." A silence descended over the room. "Explain," Alistair commanded. "The data Celine has given him," Julian continued, pointing to his screen. "It's engineered to encourage Torres Capital to launch their takeover bid at a specific price, targeting specific shareholders. But according to our actual analysis, this strategy will fail. It will trigger a poison pill defense we've uncovered in Sterling Nash's corporate bylaws, which is far more potent than the one she described. It wouldn't just block the acquisition. The backlash would leave Torres Capital dangerously over-leveraged and vulnerable. The stock would plummet." Valeria felt a shiver run down her spine. The second twist, the real twist, so she wasn't the honey trap. He was. She was manipulating him from the start. Celine Delgado wasn't a source. She was an assassin. She was feeding Maximus carefully crafted disinformation, leading him and his firm toward a perfectly designed cliff, all while stroking his ego and letting him believe he was the master manipulator. He wasn't just sleeping with the enemy. He was being gutted by her from the inside, using his own arrogance as the weapon. Alistair Valdez allowed a slow, grim smile to spread across his face. "My God," he whispered. "It's brilliant, utterly ruthless, but brilliant." He looked at his daughter, and his eyes were filled with a new kind of respect. "He gave you the gun to shoot him, and you've just found out it's a cannon." Valeria now held all the cards. She had proof of Maximus's infidelity. She had his written confession of unethical corporate espionage. And now she had proof that his grand strategy was a catastrophic failure in the making, a trap set by the very woman he thought he controlled. Not only could she destroy her husband personally, but she could also save his company from his folly, positioning herself as the key player who uncovered the entire conspiracy. The queen of the boardroom the next morning, when she walked into the cafe to meet William Sanz, she was no longer merely Valeria Torres, the wronged wife. She was Valeria Valdez, the heiress with her father's strategic mind and ruthless execution. She was calm, prepared, and ready to make her first move in a game Maximus didn't even know she was playing. The power play had begun. The cafe was a discreet, anonymous location in the Malasaña district, the kind of establishment where powerful people went to have conversations they didn't want overheard. William Sanz was already there, sipping an espresso, his face etched with worry. He was a man who lived by numbers and data, and the cryptic nature of Valeria's call had clearly unsettled him. "Valeria," he said, standing as she approached. "Thank you for meeting with me. Is everything all right? You mentioned a liability." "Hello, William," she said, her voice even. She didn't sit down right away. "The liability isn't a what, it's a who. It's Maximus. William's expression tightened. I don't understand. Is this about the Sterling Nash deal? I admit his strategy is more aggressive than I'd like, but his projections are solid. His projections, Valeria said, finally taking a seat. They are based on a fantasy fed to him by his mistress, Celine Delgado. The name landed on the table between them with the force of a physical object. William visibly paled. Celine Delgado of Sterling Nash? That's impossible. That's professional suicide. For Maximus, yes, Valeria nodded. For her, it's the strike of a lifetime. For the next 20 minutes, Valeria laid it all out. She spoke not with the emotion of a betrayed wife, but with the cold precision of a CEO delivering a devastating report. She told him about the affair, showing him a single piece of damning evidence on her phone. A time-stamped photo Julian had instructed her to retrieve from Alfaro's security footage, showing Maximus and Celine entering the elevator together. Then she moved to this business. She explained the honey trap, the manipulated data, the poison pill. She detailed how Celine was leading Maximus, and by extension the entire firm, into a perfectly designed ambush that would cripple them. She did not show him Maximus's confessional notes. That was her ace, to be held in reserve. She presented only the hard data Julian had compiled, the analysis that proved Celine's information was a lie. William listened. His initial shock turned to rising horror, and then to a cold fury. He was a man who had dedicated his life to building Torres Capital alongside Maximus, mitigating his partner's risks. To learn Maximus had exposed them all, not just out of recklessness, but out of a toxic cocktail of arrogance and infidelity, was the ultimate betrayal. The man is a pyromaniac who thinks he can control the fire, William said, his voice shaking with rage. He's going to burn the entire firm to the ground for an ego trip? Yes, Valeria said simply. Unless we stop him. The board meeting to approve the final phase of the acquisition is Friday. We have 2 days. What do you want? William asked, his eyes locked on hers. He saw her now not as the boss's wife, but as a player, a formidable one. I want what you want, William, to protect the firm. To excise the cancer, I want you to rally the board members you trust. My father is already making calls to the institutional investors his family has relationships with. When Maximus walks into that boardroom on Friday, he will not be greeted with applause. He will be met with a unified front. And you, Valeria? William asked. What is your price? My price, Valeria said, her voice dropping, is his complete removal from the company he founded. His shares will be bought out at a valuation that reflects the damage he has caused. And my divorce will be silent, swift, and unopposed. He will leave with enough to live on, but he will be stripped of his power, his reputation, and his legacy. He will be a ghost on the Madrid Stock Exchange. It was a ruthless, elegant, and total victory she was outlining. William stared at her for a long moment, then nodded sharply. Friday. We will be ready. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of encrypted calls, discreet meetings, and strategic maneuvering. Alistair Valdez worked his back-channel magic, his influence turning the tide of investor sentiment. William Sanz, armed with Valeria's irrefutable proof of the flawed data, secured the loyalty of the other board members. They were all sharks, and they could smell blood in the water. Maximus's blood. On Friday morning, Maximus Torres walked into the boardroom on the 50th floor of the Torres Capital building, feeling triumphant. He believed he was about to secure the greatest victory of his career. He had tried to call Valeria dozens of times, but she hadn't answered. He figured she was angry, hysterical, but she would eventually come around. Once she saw the billions his brilliant, if unorthodox, methods had secured for their family, he smiled as he took his seat at the head of the long, polished table. Good morning, everyone, A historic day. No one smiled back. The atmosphere in the room was arctic. William Sands sat to his right, his face like stone. The other board members looked at him with cold, eyes. "Before we begin, Maximus," William said, his voice dangerously quiet, "we have another matter to discuss. An independent risk assessment of the Sterling Nash data has revealed some alarming inconsistencies." Maximus's smile faltered. "What are you talking about? My source is rock solid." "Is your source Celine Delgado?" William asked flatly. Color drained from Maximus's face. He looked around the room at the hostile faces and realized too late that this was not a meeting. It was an ambush, an execution. And then the doors to the boardroom opened. Valeria walked in. She was flanked by her father and two lawyers. She was serene, powerful. Her pregnancy a symbol not of vulnerability, but of the future. A future that would not include him. She took a seat at the opposite end of the table, directly in his line of sight. Maximus choked. "What is this?" "This, Maximus," she said, her voice ringing with clarity in the silent room, "is called life due diligence, something you abandoned 6 months ago." One of her lawyers slid a folder across the table to him. It contained the hotel photo, the analysis of Celine's flawed data, and on top, printouts of his own text messages to Valeria. His own words condemning him. "I'm using her." He stared at the documents, his empire crumbling before his eyes. He had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and completely destroyed. "The board has held an emergency session," William announced into the void. "We have voted unanimously. We are postponing the Sterling Nash bid indefinitely, pending an internal investigation into your conduct, and we ask for your immediate resignation as CEO and chairman." Maximus looked from the board members to Alistair Valdez, whose expression was one of cold satisfaction. Then his gaze fell upon his wife. Her face showed no mercy, no lingering affection. It showed only the serene calm of a victor. He was finished. He knew it. Celine Delgado's plan had been exposed, but not by him. His affair had been discovered. His professional judgment was shattered. He had lost everything. Everything. Because he had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the woman carrying his child. Valeria stood up, her part in the proceedings complete. She did not need to say another word. As she walked out of the boardroom, she did not look back. She was walking toward her new life, one she would forge herself from the ashes of her husband's ruin. She was no longer merely a Valdez by name. She had become the embodiment of their power. Her son would be born into a legacy not of lies, but of strength, secured by a mother who had faced the ultimate betrayal and emerged as the queen of the boardroom. In the end, it was not the affair that brought down Maximus Torres's empire. It was his arrogance. He believed he could compartmentalize his life, keeping his betrayals neatly separated from his business. But lies are never contained. They bleed, infecting everything they touch. Valeria's journey from a trusting pregnant wife to a cold, calculating strategist shows us that the deepest wounds can forge the strongest armor. She did not merely survive. She conquered. By refusing to be a victim, she rewrote her own history and the future of everyone around her. What do you think? Was Valeria's revenge justified, or was it too ruthless? Could you have done what she did? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of ultimate drama, betrayal, and empowerment has captivated you, please like this video. Share it with someone who loves a good tale of poetic justice, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that are stranger and more compelling than fiction.